Comparatives and superlatives in Spanish explain the differences between people and things. In English, there's a very simple system on how to use these ideas correctly, but there are a few exceptions that make the language sound better. In Spanish, understanding how these ideas work can be a bit tricky, but I'll try to explain them as easily as possible. Before fully knowing comparatives and superlatives, you have to know that Spanish actually doesn't have a notion of adding letters at the end of simple words like in English. So it relies on the words más and menos, meaning more or less, to express its phrases. Make sure that you focus on these words because you will see them in almost every sentence. As an example, the sentence esta clase es pequeña means this class is small, but its comparative version is different in Spanish. In English, we say the class is smaller by adding the letters er to simple words, but Spanish does not have the system. Instead, it decides to use the word más, meaning more, to justify the meaning by putting it before the adjective. So, the sentence would be esta clase es más pequeña, meaning this class is more small. While this is logical in Spanish, it feels weird to say more small in English because English simply adds letters to the end of regular adjectives. Nonetheless, it's still possible to say the phrase as it is. This class is more small, which is literally and visually how the sentence works in Spanish. The superlative version, on the other hand, is actually a bit more complex because it adds an article to justify the claim both in English and Spanish. The sentence this class is the smallest contains an est at the end of the adjective and the article the that specifies that this class is in fact the smallest. Similarly, this is how the sentence works in Spanish, which only changes the meaning of one word. The sentence in Spanish would be esta clase es la más pequeña, meaning this class is the most small. While this makes sense in Spanish, it again seems odd to say the most small because English combines the words. Nevertheless, it's still possible to say this phrase as it is. This class is the most small, with the word más acting as the word most, unlike more from the previous phrase. Even though it's unusual to see phrases like more small and the most small, this is how Spanish defines comparatives and superlatives. English decides to combine the phrases into one word rather than keeping them in their form. So there's really nothing difficult about this concept once you visually see it in English. As a matter of fact, it's easier to understand this concept once you start using less to express an inferior quality. Saying something like this class is less small and this class is the least small is visually how the sentences work in Spanish. Esta clase es menos pequeña and esta clase es la menos pequeña is literally how the phrases work in English. The only difference is that in the first sentence, menos means less, and in the second, la menos means the least. An easy way to remember this is if you see an article before más o menos, they would mean most or least. If there isn't an article, más o menos simply mean more or less. As always, it's up to you to say any sentence that you want using más o menos. An even easier way to understand this concept is by using words that do not combine themselves. This shirt is expensive in Spanish is esta camisa es cara. The sentence says this shirt is more or less expensive and this shirt is the most or least expensive work even comparably to Spanish because the word expensive isn't a word that combines itself. We don't say expensiver or expensivest because the sound of the words would be too bad, so that's the reason why English decides to use words like more, most, less, or least. Esta camisa es más o menos cara and esta camisa es la más o menos cara literally and visually mean this shirt is more or less expensive and this shirt is the most or least expensive, and that is as difficult as it gets. As always, it's up to you to use comparatives and superlatives to say any sentence you want. At last, there's one final concept to know with comparatives and superlatives, and they're somewhat similar to the concept in English, being irregular comparatives and superlatives that have to do with words like bueno, buena, malo, mala, joven, which is a neutral adjective, and viejo, vieja, which mean good, bad, young, and old. As far as I know, these are the only irregular qualities used to describe something as inferior or superior. In English, saying something like this lesson is good would be a simple sentence, but the word changes to better in the comparative form and the best in the superlative. And it's the same idea of the word bad, being worse and worst. Spanish likewise has this concept, but it's a bit more irregular. Saying esta lección es buena would be a simple sentence, but the comparative version would be esta lección es mejor, meaning this lesson is better. Similarly, having an irregular change like in English. In the superlative form, the sentence would be esta lección es la mejor, with an article indicating this. But in this context, the word mejor means best rather than better from the previous phrase. A tip that I can give here is that if you see an article before mejor, the word would mean the best. If there isn't an article, mejor simply means better. And it's the same irregular concept for malo, mala, joven, and viejo, vieja. Saying something like este libro es malo means this book is bad. Saying este libro es peor means this book is worse. And saying este libro es el peor means this book is the worst. Similarly, it's the same concept with joven, meaning young, and viejo, vieja, meaning old. Saying el niño es joven means the kid is young. Saying el niño es menor means the kid is younger. And saying saying el niño es el menor means the kid is the youngest. Saying ella es vieja means she is old. Saying ella es mayor means she's older. And saying ella es la mayor means she's the oldest. Of course, it's up to you to say any sentence that you want using irregular comparatives and superlatives in Spanish. This has been Comparatives and Superlatives in Spanish. Thank you for watching this video, and hopefully I made your learning just a bit simpler.